Hey guys, what's going on? Today you're in the studio with me, Lockjaw, and today I'll be taking you through how I made my track Suffer in Silence, which is out on Plasma Audio. Today I'll take you through a little bit of the software I use, how I do things, the kind of workflow that I use, some of the plugins I use and stuff like that, and hopefully you guys can get an insight into the way I like to do things. So yeah. I guess first off, this track is kind of not really my usual sort of track. I guess it's a bit more, has a few more sections in it, a few more melodic sections, different kind of A to B sections, and not really typical dance floor type tracks. I thought it'd be interesting to talk my way through it. I'll actually be showing you through two versions of the project. The first one, which is the one I have open now, is kind of where the track was at about halfway through the production process, and then after that I'll show you the project where the track is completely finished. So yeah, as you guys can see, I'm working in Cubase, but if you're using any other digital audio workstation, all the principles I talk about today will be applicable to any software basically. So yeah, I'll start with some drums. I'll go through how I did a lot of the drums for this track, then I'll go through some bass, and then we'll do some pads and stabs and FX and stuff. So yeah, so basically all these tracks from here to about here, the drum channels for this tune at this stage of the production. And I like to just keep things all folded up and organized, and I've got sub groups for some of the major groups in this track, and they all go down to a drum group, a drum bus down the bottom. So the start of this track kind of was based around this 8-bar drum loop, I guess you could call it. I started messing around with this, and then the rest of the track kind of grew out of that. So we'll just have a listen to that. So you can hear it's a pretty acoustic sounding drum kit, kind of a bit old school, maybe a little bit more vintage than the stuff I would usually kind of do. So first things first for me usually is with the kick. So I've got my kick here is coming from these two audio files. I like to do everything in audio, or at least end up with everything in audio. So that's how I started with this. This is the main kick sample, and as you can hear, it's quite punchy, nothing really crazy about it, just a nice punch, and it's got a tiny little sort of roomy spread sample on top of it. The thing I wanted to say about this though is the kick is, if we look at the spectrum of the kick, we can see here that its punch harmonic of this kick is about 130 Hertz. And it's got a bit of sub content here, but not that much. And the reason this is important is because, with drum and bass, you've got so much sub, low frequency information that it's nice if you can get your kick to pitch above the sub, which will be around, 40 to 60 Hertz. So this allows this kick to actually come through the mix quite well. So yeah, that's pretty straightforward for the kick. There's a bunch of different snares in this tune, so we'll start with the first one. So there's 3 layers going on here. If we look at the first one, which is coming from a massive track. I just turn this off. You just hear the fairly dry snare here, which I've made in massive. So we can see here, this is just a basic sine wave, some white noise, a really fast descending pitch envelope, and some volume envelopes to make this basic snare sound. So it looks something like that on a spectrum. And I like to use massive a lot for doing this sort of thing because it's just easy to get like a very basic fundamental punch part of a snare. Something to get you started, which is pretty useful. On top of that, we've got this more acoustic sounding kind of rim shot, I guess you would say, which is actually a snare from superior drummer, which has been, I mean, sorry, not addictive drummer, addictive drums. And this is a snare that has been pitched up and tweaked quite tightly with the volume envelope. If you guys haven't used addictive drums, it's really great plugin. It's basically just a whole drum kit recorded with a million different velocities and timbres and different parts of the kit, and it's just super useful to get good drum sounds from, and just an insane amount of tweakability. So if we turn this off, turn off the pitch envelope and the volume envelope of this snare, we can hear what it sounds like dry. So very loose, very kind of not very drum and bassy kind of snare. So I've just pitched it up and tweaked it to kind of layer it over this thicker synth snare below. Quite subtle. Also obviously just making sure to EQ this properly so it doesn't clash with the synth snare. And then the final layer is this another even higher kind of rim shot sound, but it's also quite wide, spread quite wide over this stereo field. So just obviously EQ'd out the low end that wasn't needed, and then once you play them all together, you get the nice kind of punch part of the snare. You got some nice overtone harmonics here, and you got like the usual white noisy kind of stuff to give it a bit of a snap. And yeah, that's kind of the first snare. I've got another snare here, which is actually just coming straight from addictive drums. So if I turn off the pitch and volume envelope again on this, you can hear it sounds quite boring and flabby. Also very useful to play with the velocity here, as you can get a whole bunch of nice different sounds out of those snares if you tweak the velocities. I think both these snare groups are actually being sent to this send called snare verb, which if you look at snare verb, this is just an auxiliary channel, a send here. You can hear that this send actually has a reverb, a very short reverb, which and then this send itself is being sent to another send, which is a snare delay. Some kind of craziness going on there. And on the snare delay channel, it's just a kind of eighth note delay to give the snares a kind of almost like a hi-hat-y sound after them. Kind of cool effect, I think. What am I doing? Here we go. If you hear that kind of eighth note sound, it adds a nice kind of effect to the snares. And so after the kick and snare are done, start working some percussion. I've got a basic tambourine here. This is the from the Think break, old funk break. Distorted, EQ'd a bit, gated. The gate is quite important here to kind of tighten up this sound. If I turn it off, the sound is much looser, lot more low-level audio coming through. So gates are really great for cleaning up old breaks, getting them real tight and real specific. A little bit of reverb there, which is kind of unusual, but just wanted to give it some space. And then I believe this is sidechain to the kick. Yeah, so that just gives it a bit of a rhythm. Underneath that, we've got a kind of bit of a little shuffle there. Again, some more gating, a bit of distortion, EQ. This is just a little percussion fill that I've chopped up and placed here. Done some pretty crazy EQing, and then also sent to a delay down here, which is just this dotted quarter note delay. Give it a bit of a give it a bit of space and dynamic. It kind of adds to the way the break has impact in a way, because like the way it interacts with where the snares land and the kicks land, that delay kind of gives some nice flow to the beat, I think. And then we've got some another little shuffle here, which I've chopped up and warped a bit and put in where I want it to be, and it kind of fits in underneath. It's kind of pitched a bit lower than this one, so they kind of interact a bit, I guess. And this kind of gives the whole break that sort of old schooly sound, I think. So that's kind of the first 4 bars of the break, and then we'll go into the next one. So the center point of this 4-bar section, I think, is this sample here, this really gnarly kind of break sample from actually Break Sample Pack. Really dirty kind of reverby break, which I've chopped up a bit and fit in to the rest of the break. It's got some crazy EQing there. It's just compressed a bit, distorted a bit more, and then sidechain to the kick, I believe. Yeah, so it kind of gives it that pumping, tight, sort of flowy feel to it. And then the other main part of the second bit of the break is these hats. These are actually some hats I made a while ago in Superior Drummer, which is a plugin similar to Addictive Drums, and then distorted, so they're really kind of broken up. And I think these are actually important because they're quite fizzy and distorted, and where they are in the arrangement kind of lines up with the bass, which we'll come back to later, and kind of actually in a weird way adds to the bass sound. So yeah, that's pretty much it for the drums. I mean, there's a few other little things which come in, like some more percussion here, little fill, but it's really just those major pieces, and then they're all just kind of rearranged a bit. I think this is what's this? Yeah, really spread wide, reverby kind of low-pitched tambourine to fill out some of the wider spectrums in the wider field of the drums. So yeah, at the moment, you know, lots of things are running in MIDI, which we will get to later. But yeah, I bus all the drums, all the major groups to their subgroups, like a bit of kick for all the kicks, a few snare layers, a few snare groups I should say, and then some percussions. And they all come down to this group down here called drums. And this is just got a bit of limiting on it from Vintage Warmer. Handy trick with Vintage Warmer, use the knee control, don't use the drive control. That's what I like to do anyway, because this knee control seems to act like raising the knee kind of acts like lowering the threshold on the limiter, and also has an inbuilt auto gain feature. So using this kind of just cranks the limiter, which I find really useful. And the speed, fully left is more tapey sounding, fully right is kind of cleaner sounding. So yeah, yeah, and that's about it. And the group is just being sent to a slight ambient reverb to give it a bit more space, and that's pretty much the whole drum setup. It doesn't look like much now, but I guess, you know, it's quite a bit of work constructing all these audio files and making these snares and EQing and polishing up all these things. So it really pays off to spend a lot of time doing that. Yeah, so I guess now I'll move on to some bass. So at the moment I've got all my basses grouped up here and a few other random tracks that shouldn't be in there, but that's how things go sometimes. So yeah, all the bass for this track is kind of centered around this Reese sort of sound. Just listen to this. So it's this kind of sort of reminiscent of an old school, maybe Reese that's been sampled and pitched up, maybe transposed around, but it's, I like to do everything with synths, so it's not really that exact vibe. But if we just look at the thing here, this first 4 bars, the synth is actually being low passed, I'll just take this off for a moment. So if you look at the construction of this synth, it's really just a sine wave, and then a saw wave. Detuned a bit, and not actually that much special going on, but just the interesting thing here is the LFO, which is modulating the volume on these. And the interesting about this is that I've put the key tracker on the rate of the LFO, as well as the detune. Oh no, that's the velocity. As well as the So just the key tracking is on the rate of the LFO, which is modulating the volume, which means when the synth plays a high note, it'll wobble a lot, and when it's playing a lower note, it wobbles slower. So that kind of emulates that sound of if you were, making drum and bass in the 90s and you had a sampler and you wanted to change the pitch of a Reese. All you could do was kind of pitch it up, and it would, pitching it up would make the oscillations faster, and pitching it down would slow it down. So it gives that sound like this. Nope, like this. So as you can hear, the higher you go up the octaves, the faster it wobbles. So it's pretty crazy because it's not actually synced. So I had to kind of fiddle around a bit to get it to kind of stay in time, which also gives it a more kind of loose analog-y feel, I guess some would say. And here, this is the same synth, but it's been I've made 2 layers of it here. I've just duplicated this one, made 2 more here. So we've got a version here which is completely mono, and then I've duplicated that and spread this one real wide with some dimension expanding and I don't know what you call this, the pan position tool in Massive, and then high passed it. So when you play them together, you get the powerful bass in the middle, but then also this nice kind of fizzy spread layer. Another thing to note with this bass, all these 2 basses, is that I'm sending them both to an auxiliary track called wide bass, and if you look at what wide bass is doing here, if I just solo the send, so I've kind of isolated this low mid area. I've added a really short reverb to give it a lot of width. I've limited it a bit and then re-EQ'd it. So we've kind of got this low mid area, which is spread real wide. As you can hear, it's very prominent in the stereo field. And so when you mix that back in with the rest of the bass, you kind of get a nice width to the low end. If I turn it off, oh. So now the bass is basically completely mono. If I add that back in, you can hear you get a nice bit of thickness and width in the low end, which is pretty cool. So that's really the majority of the bass. There's another bass sound which comes in here. So here we've got another bass patch. Which is another Reese kind of sound I made from scratch a while ago, and I guess it's got a different timbre to these Reeses here, and it's also got this really massive kind of pitch bending kind of sound, and it also sounds different to this main Reese because it's like quite a bit more reverby and affected. It's got a bit more movement in it. So there was just a bit of fiddling around to get some automation with like envelopes and just getting it, trying to fit in to make like a nice little riff as a variation in this section of the tune. I'm not really sure what else I can say about this. Just a lot of fiddling really. There's lots of just little details going on to construct the sound. So I like to spend a lot of time getting the sound right itself, and then it's quite easy to figure out how to use it, I find. So yeah. Also being sent to that wide bass channel and some reverbs here. So yeah, that's kind of pretty much all the bass in this tune. And there's one little bass sample here. I just fished this out of a sample pack because I just wanted a sub a sub note with a different kind of texture to the main bass sound. So I just found this sample and put it there. And another thing to note in this section of the tune is that the sub is like lined up with the kicks and snares. It's a good thing to do. Gives your drums a lot more power if your bass like lands on it as well. We can hear here that you can hear that kind of LFOing sound on the bass is that key tracking on the LFO rate again. So yeah. So now we'll move on to some of these pads, some of the melodic elements of the track, and we'll look at this pad here first. It's actually quite a simple, just saw wave based thing with some low pass filtering and a bit of delay, reverb, to give it, some filtering, give it a bit of movement. I think what this layer is, this is the stab. So this pad is just kind of used to fill out the low mid area with that nice droney sort of sound, and it's made quite wide. And it plays in the intro as well. If you look at the phrase that it's playing, it's actually really quite simple. It's just fifths with the odd note here and there, and kind of a little bit of a just a bit of a little melodic thing going on there. If you look below, we have this stab, which I believe is actually a variation of this pad, which I've turned into a stabby kind of sound with some saw waves, modulating the volume of the pads and so forth. And so this one is kind of really in the center. It's really almost mono, apart from some reverb sends. And this one is quite wide. So with these two together, you fill out a lot of the frequency spectrum. And this is also sidechained to the kick, I believe. Give it a bit more of a rhythm. Yeah. So that's pretty much the majority of the melodic stuff going on. We've also got some horns here. This is actually kind of just an atmospheric thing from Contact's default library. I believe it's a tuba. Yeah, just the default tuba sound with some automation on Homicide, which is a multi-band distortion plugin. So you've got 4 bands here. I'm only using 3, and I've automated the band cutoff. So this mid band is distorted quite a lot, and as this, you'll see this it's changing the frequency cutoff between these 2 bands. So it gives it a bit of movement, bit of tonal variation, and that's just kind of fit in there as a sort of atmospheric thing. Then we've got these stabs, which I guess are the main hook, I guess you could call them, of the drop. This is actually a default patch from Massive, which I screwed around with and tweaked quite a bit. It's just kind of another detuned saw wave type thing. It sounds a bit retro, I guess, a bit old school. Just detuned stuff, quite a bit of distortion, and then just a bit of bit crushing and some EQ to keep it out of the way of the bass, and then it just kind of plays this melody which the bass actually kind of follows. And then as we progress into the track, there's another stab here which is frozen because I think it would start slowing down my computer. It's a very similar type of patch, just quite stabby, just fits in with the kick and snare. Yeah, a bit of reverb, bit of detuning, that sort of thing, just to continue with the theme of the track. I think with drum and bass it's quite important to always keep things relatively simple in terms of melodies if you're going to add in melody to your tracks. So that the genre is so busy usually and so fast that it's very easy to just overcomplicate things. So this is just playing, you know, a few notes to kind of embellish, I guess, the track. Yeah, so these stabs kind of vary a little bit and they play throughout the track. And then we've also got there's a few little bits up here. I think this is a sample that I made years ago actually, out of a synth or multiple synths. It kind of just bounced down to one file. It sounds kind of nice, like I guess like I've called it a dead choir. And then there's also a little another, these really kind of neutral tones which you can put subtly throughout the track to kind of fill out the background and give it a bit more harmonic content, I guess. Yeah, so that's pretty much the majority of the track. So in this stage of the production, there's this is like halfway through where I've basically finished the arrangement, and the next step I'll show you in the next project is sounds a lot cleaner.